Welcome to the Health ROI Show, where we cut through the noise and get straight to the health interventions that have the greatest return on investment, hence ROI, of your time, your energy, and yes, your money. I'm Liz Bradford, ex-MD in banking, founder and board advisor, and in each episode I bring you fireside conversations with the longevity physicians, health tech founders, and optimization specialists who are transforming how high performers optimize their health. If you treat your health like you treat your business, data-driven, systematic, and ROI-focused, you're in the right place. This isn't wellness advice, it's health intelligence backed by data, designed for execution, and built for measurable results. Let's dive in.
All right, so welcome, Tina. I am very, very excited to be able to interview you on the Health ROI Show. For those who have not yet come across her, Tina Woods is a system architect and social entrepreneur at the intersection of longevity science, AI, and policy innovation. So as the founder of Collider Health and Business for Health, plus the author, so she's literally written the book on this, of Live Longer with AI, how artificial intelligence is helping us to extend our health span and live better too. She can offer us a macro perspective on how technology and systemic change are democratizing elite health protocols, which is what we're all about. Her work on the Human Exosome Project, I knew I was going to mispronounce that, and role as
There are
health
many
and
ways of pronouncing it, so don't worry.
means that she is uniquely positioned to have a cutting-edge insight and around the future of health optimization and what that really means for us, particularly around things like the environments in which we are living. So, Tina, is there anything I've missed out or omitted or...
I'm sure it'll come out in the conversation. I wear a lot of hats, but they all interconnect around system change, driving a very broken model of sick care to one that's much more rooted in prevention. I'm sure it'll come out in all the answers to your questions.
It would be great to dive straight in because I think it's a really important conversation that many of us are not having or even considering because we're so focused on the day-to-day and the individualistic elements of our well-being. But maybe if we step back, first of all, how did you get into this? And I know you love your work and you're pretty much always working, but how did you get into it?
Well, I mean, I have a science background. I studied genetics a very long time ago, was pre-med, decided not to go into medicine, but I kind of was very involved in the world of pharma and biotech for many years. But what I'm doing now in terms of the system change approach and with very much, looking to harnessing the new technologies around us, that was really from about 8-9 years ago that I really started to look at this space. And I was driven mainly by curiosity about how we as individuals and people could take more ownership of our health, because so much of our healthcare system is very much kept in tow by industries, the way that our cultural mindsets, our systems, and so I see the role of technology as actually being part of the driver of change, because we're seeing a lot of problems with what we've got at the moment, and it's a lot of it's driven by our sort of addiction to convenience. Our culture doesn't help our health at all. Our westernized ways, if they've made us more and more unhealthy, and of course we're now gripped with all the mental health and sort of despair, and that's evident certainly in our younger population. So we're at a sort of a really important point in time to kind of really address this from a system change perspective. So that's really what I've been doing over the last 8-9 years, trying to work out how you can do that, because it's very, very difficult. And what I've realized is you have to understand and be able to pull the main levers that that you need either to progress things or the ones that you have to address because of the ones blocking things. So, and that really means governments, policy making, obviously the role of big business, the investor world, where the big money is sitting, and of course the general public. I mean, that's the most critical one of all. So in all my different works, across the years, and I kind of specialize in mission-driven ventures, really, because that's really a really good way of actually getting very, very disparate sort of stakeholder groups who have their own, agendas, some of which they're very clear about, some of which are very hidden agendas, some of them are very big elephants in the room that never get talked about. But these are, and that's one of the reasons why we're finding it so difficult to really, because we know, it makes a lot of sense. We just have to find ways of keeping healthier rather than leave it too late, which is often what we do. And that absolutely must change. And the burning platform has arrived so many, many times. So it's really how to do that, which is kind of what I've been working out with all the various things that I do.
Amazing. And I have to say, and this may not have been what you meant with leave it too late, but I've just spent a lot of time in the last few months in hospital wards.
Gosh, yeah.
And where people are clearly, they've got another decade maybe because of the medicinal intervention that can prevent specific symptoms, but their health span and their enjoyment of life is so limited, and it is heartbreaking to see.
It is
And then that's all in a
heartbreaking.
system that's creaking as well. So it's a real challenge.
It is a real challenge. The situation is, we've obviously got an aging demographic, but our health is getting worse. So we're living more and more years with multimorbidities. And it's crazy because, 10% of the healthcare budget in the UK is spent in the last 2 weeks of someone's life, usually in a hospital where they don't want to be and being very unhappy. And it's not the way to go, really, for most people. So I think, or the preferred way to go, something is really profoundly wrong. And we're seeing it before our eyes. The healthcare system, we're putting more and more money into it. It's getting less and less effective. We've got too much demand. Everything is getting much more complicated, and literally the economy in the UK is being dragged down by our workforce and activity crisis, and not just the plus 50s, which is generally more around physical health, but we have a terrible mental health problem now with our younger populations, and they're part of the situation that we have to fix. So it really has reached breaking point, and of course the government are looking at this very, very carefully. But again, too little, too late. They're driven by very short-term electoral cycles. A lot of business and investment are driven by very sort of short-term cycles. Not only, but we need that longer-term horizon. And I would argue, we need to see health as an asset, and everything that we do has to be more along the lines of an actuarial model of health. You invest here, you get your benefit maybe very much down the line, and that's part of the problem. And that's what government are faced with is, well, if we invest here and the benefit goes here, that creates a problem with the whole kind of way that the system is working with different government departments. And that kind of thing is replicated a million times in just all the systems that we've got. Even our healthcare system is still, not outcomes directed, and we must actually, so it's a whole systems root and branch review that we have to do. So that's really been at the heart of what I've been doing and trying to work out, and with various, initiatives, underway to address that.
When you talk about it, it sounds a bit overwhelming.
It is.
What is it?
It is, and many people think I'm absolutely nuts.
Well, thank you for doing what you do, because I think most people would run a mile.
Because you don't get thanked for it often. You get a lot of pushback, and a lot of
I'm
people who are
sure.
who are skeptical and who are threatened. That's the other thing. We're all human beings. We all have roles and positions of power and influence, and sometimes we don't want to lose that, and that's part of the problem. So yeah.
Yeah, and it's a big challenge because everything you're talking about in the system is also a reflection of human nature, because we do as individuals, we put off something that we know will help in 10 years for an immediate benefit. So like, do I have this piece of cake now, which will be nice and I'll get my dopamine and my everything else? Or do I worry about, my waistline in 10 years time? And it's effectively just systemic.
You're absolutely right. It is every level of the system. I see it as a behavioral change challenge. We have individual behavior that we have to address. We have corporate behavior, government behavior, and then cultural norms, all those sorts of things at a sort of a national. It is all about behavior. We're very irrational creatures as human beings. And, there are lots of reasons why we don't do things, even though we know it would be better for us. So that is the hardest nut to crack. So again, this is where, again, a lot has been, my focus of work, and I have a personal journey too, kind of working it out for myself. Like we're all individuals. I'm always amazed. We each have very profound stories that do guide us, and I don't think, even with all this AI and all the rest of it galloping around us, in the end, I think the world that we want to live in, has to protect at its core the fact that we are living, breathing humans that have a huge need for love, belonging, companionship, community. And these are all the sorts of things that are really hitting us now. And so a lot of my work is actually really working out, how do you actually measure that humanness? Because a lot of the work that I see in longevity science, for example, it's all down at the level of trying to work out what's happening at a genetic cellular level. And actually, we are part of a system. We are part of a planetary system. We are part of, and you can't get away with that. So I think a lot of what we're finding out now is all the stuff that we're seeing at the cutting edge of research. There's precious little at the moment that's translating into the human system because it hasn't recognized the colossal impact of our environments that shape our behaviors, our hopes and dreams. And then, of course, you have just the sheer reality of, poor quality air, or sort of, there's obviously stress in our worlds that's terrible, for our biology. And of course, the food that we're eating, the ultra high processed food, the junk food, it's just really, really, it's really hitting us. The obesity epidemic, and and that's in the preserve of that's food systems, that's food companies. We've got a pharma industry, that has made a lot of money off of chronic diseases, and in the end, it's about really kind of tapping into what is the world that we want to live in. And I see there's this whole need to realign the incentive structures that are currently driving a lot of our behavior behavior, both individually but at all levels of the system. So it kind of comes down to this dismantling of the incentives, because that's the critical thing, because we are motivated and driven by, these rewards, these incentives. So we just need to shift it around what values we hold precious, And I think we're seeing, especially post COVID, when we've seen the sheer destruction, and have realized, that the wider systemic inequalities are really deeply entrenched and are really at the heart of some of the crises that we have now. And I think, if you're well educated now, and have the resources, we're seeing this huge kind of, increase in consumer health and wellness spending, for example. People are recognizing that health is their most precious asset. And so, so some of that is good, because that will, help drive some of the system shifts that we need to see. Because in the end, people vote in their governments, well, in the democratic world. And,
Yeah.
and of course, I have 3 sons in their 20s, and they're already changing their behavior quite, they're becoming vegans. They don't drink as much. They're much more aware of their health. They're also dragged down by a lot of mental stress and anxiety, and that's driven by obviously the whole kind of big tech, social media, this digital age where we are more disconnected and isolated than ever. So I think, these are going to be big forces, I think, that will help to drive some of the system shift that is fundamentally needed.
Yeah, I hope, and I know you're right. We were both at the Health Optimization Summit a few days ago, and the one thing that really struck me is how much people talked about connection and
Hmm.
how much people talked about, and these are people you would expect to
Yeah,
just be talking about biohacking, and they were talking about what is the point of having, peak optimum health if you're not connected, if you don't have strong relationships, if you're not part of something bigger. And I
exactly.
really hope that that is not just an echo chamber, and that that actually is a genuine movement, because it feels like that's the only way we're going to get out of the situation we're in as a society at the moment.
So I completely agree with you. And I spent obviously a lot of time in these sort of very uber groovy sort of longevity circles, and got a lot of conferences. I've been at, 3 conferences in the last couple of weeks. But what I've found very interesting, there's sort of 3 things that are really emerging. So first of all, I think this whole notion of health equity is starting to become really, really big, so that we cannot see, this longevity. And of course, everyone has a different definition of longevity. I mean, the way that I describe longevity, for example, is really harnessing the science and technology of, the latest aging research, longevity science, etc., to be able to move upstream in health prevention, and to be able to make sure that we are able to increase our years lived in good health, so we don't have the situation where we are at the moment. And if you get it right, and if you're a really purist about it, with really good sort of health span, you can achieve, you get the side effect of extra lifespan as well. So you really cut down that period of intense multimorbidity. You squeeze it really, really short, and you just basically drop dead, after having lived a really great life. I think that's
That's
the
the
ideal.
dream. That's the dream.
That's an ideal. And that is possible. And actually, a lot of the supercentenarians, that's the way that they do it. So we have some things to learn from that. And at that point, genetics actually does have a role to play. But actually, most of it is about what we do in our lives, which, of course, are very shaped by the environments in which we live and our choices and behaviors. So there's only so much you can do with individual agency. A lot of it is about, the environments in which we live. So this is where this whole issue of, and where the Human Exposome project that I'm involved in comes in, because what it does, it really sheds a light in terms of sheer evidence of impact on human health, both individually but also at a population health level, the colossal impact on external forces and environmental threats on our health that we may not be able to do anything about. So I'm talking about things like air pollution. We've got, microplastics now. I mean, it's really, really, really causing problems. We've got things like arsenic. They've really discovered the link between arsenic and also neurodegenerative diseases. These are poisons, toxins in our environment. Stress is this is the biggest killer, and isolation and loneliness together, they create this huge drag on our health, right? And we know about exercise, lack of movement. We use cars too much. We don't move around as much, the way that we should, the way that we used to. And of course, poor eating habits, junk food. These all are hugely driving our healthy life expectancy, our health span. And so we have to get to grips with that. It's not just about, pills and supplements. And, and I know there's a lot of really interesting cutting edge research, which will be great, once it starts really showing the result and impact in humans, not just animal models and nematode worms. That's great, but there's an awful lot, that we can be doing right now that will have far more impact at scale, and will also address this health equity question, which has come up over and over again in recent conferences, which is really interesting. So the Exposome Project, which is measuring all these external factors in our lives across our lifetime, so even before birth, because the preconception exposome, what your parents do, how they're eating, their stress levels, cells, all that has an epigenetic kind of legacy in offspring, and that's generations ahead that you're talking about. Your choices will affect future generations. So I'm really excited about that, because once you start getting the evidence and the data, and we have the technology now, we've got the AI, we've got the quantum sensing, we've got systems biology, all that sort of stuff, then you can really start to impact the big decisions that are being made at government level, policymaking level, and in an investor level, like pension funds, insurance, and all the investment, and sort of, and I see this, twin opportunity. You invest in health. So there's been this whole focus on climate. Obviously, there's been a lot of upheaval, obviously, with the new U.S. administration, where it's evolved into a wholly different thing. But we know there are many, many nations very, very focused on addressing their climate issues. The Middle East, they can see it in their communities. They're being really hard hit. They're disinvesting away, obviously, from reliance on fossil fuels. And they're investing very heavily in health, and you get that co-benefit, because our health is it's completely intertwined with the planet's health, air, food, all that sort of stuff. So there's a huge, interest of, the serious money. And of course, we're seeing our younger generations already influencing some of those trends. So I think there's a lot happening that is going in the right direction. And I spent a lot of time in other countries where they don't have the barriers that we have, the legacy systems, the cultural maps, the vested interests. They can kind of design a kind of a sort of a prevention-led economy. So that's what the Middle East are doing, because they've done the numbers. If you're 65 and are in good health, you're probably the most productive citizen you will ever be. And they want to push that up to 85. And you'll have the economic gains, you'll have the societal gains, you'll have much better quality of life. So it's kind of like putting, what we've learned from the blue zone countries, those areas around the world, which is, again, very back to basics. It's the simple stuff that your grandmother told you. But now we're getting the data, the evidence. So I'm very involved in these so-called kind of measurable blue zone projects, which link up to the Human Exposome project.
Yeah. And I always love that there's a saying about, like, if your grandmother couldn't recognize it, you shouldn't be putting it in your mouth.
Well, there's a lot of truth in that.
Yeah.
Going back to the future, going back to our former ways, is often actually, there's a lot of common sense in that. So, we have to kind of undo a lot of the damage that we have been doing on ourselves through the lifestyles that we lead. Because again, you can kind of see how it happens by default. Human like the path of least resistance. So if it's easy, then you are more likely to do it. Not getting out of your chair, eating the chocolate, all that kind of stuff. And so we have to just change the environment, change the incentive structures, and tap into our intrinsic motivations as people. And what matters to you as an individual, that will usually drive your behavior.
Yeah. And I think it's very interesting to see. So there's the thing about it being easy, but I think there's also a level of competition in human nature as well. And so people say, like, being told, if someone had come to me 5 years and gone, but you really just need to slow down, because actually the stress you're under right now is killing you. And if you look at my biomarkers now, it's the only risk I have. And it's a severe risk still,
Yeah.
because of the damage the stress is doing to me and the lack of sleep and everything else. But if someone had said, just slow down, you're like, well, no, I'm not going to slow down because no one else is slowing down. So it's, whereas now I'm like in the middle of nowhere on a farm, living my best life and all of that stuff. But if you told me to do that 5 years ago, even though I knew it was better for my health, I think it's hard because everyone wants to conform and no one wants to fall behind. And actually what the Middle East is doing is incredibly smart, because what they're doing is they're building a talent pool that will outcompete every other region in 20 years' time. Because
And they'll
there's
have a
no
much healthier,
less
they'll have a much healthier nation. So they'll be more
exactly.
productive, and they'll be booming,
Yeah, and
economically.
happier. So it's
Yeah.
super, super smart. And I think
Yeah.
there's that, it's hard to tell people convenience, 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 pace, get on that rat wheel, keep going, keep going, keep going. Hamster wheel, I should say, sorry, rat race,
Yeah.
hamster wheel.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
then to tell them to get off. But I am seeing a really interesting movement, particularly in women who are in midlife, who are going, actually, I was sold a bad trade. This is not a good deal for me anymore. And actually, what I do want to do is slow down. And I do want to, go and have all of my animals or my small holding or whatever it is. And I know it's a
Yeah.
meme and it's a joke, but I
Yeah.
think it's interesting to see that you've got Gen Z very much pushing back against what Gen X and the millennials were, kind of put through. And then you're also seeing at the other end of the age scale, in that midlife phase, people just going, actually, this was a terrible deal.
So, I completely see what you're saying. I would slightly, I guess, in terms of sort of my own personal journey and also what I also see around me, I don't think it's a question of either slowing down. For me, it's all about really reaching really what you want to do and what matters to you. You're kind of, I mean, people talk about purpose, fulfillment, and really being who you are. And the beauty about getting older is that, there's this path. You finally kind of accept yourself in a way that you probably would never be able to in your 20s, because that's when you are most likely to be judging yourself against others, that whole sort of peer pressure. Whereas I think if I look to myself, I wouldn't say I've slowed down. If anything, I've kind of speeded up because I'm so involved and living out really what I love to do. And so, I think it's a very individual thing. I think it's about what really motivates you and makes you happy, and being able to do that, which gives you the joy, which gives you the pleasure.
Mm.
The whole intrinsic, positive vicious circle around that. And so I think, I think that's a really good place to be. And I think when you're, as a woman, once if you've had children, and once you've hit that period in your life and your children are starting to leave home, going to whatever, and usually it's timed around the menopause, which
Yeah.
can be a very difficult period for some
Yeah.
women. But actually, the way that I have kind of responded to it, and which has been obviously fantastic, is it's kind of like this new phase in my life where I have been able to kind of focus, well, on me for a start, because when you're busy with your work and your kids and your husband and keeping the whole, it's much more difficult, and you just don't. Whereas I had finally the time to think and actually sort of look at, well, what's really important for me, and of course, and it's not a selfish thing, because in the end, it's also about giving yourself that vitality, that inner energy that you can then spread around you, and
Mm.
involve others in that. So for me, it's been hugely all around that, just kind of feeling kind of like I've kind of now I kind of understand what I'm all about, and I'm now living and doing what I really love to do. So I think that's a nice place to be. I think it's part of, a journey of life that, we're all on.
Yeah.
Some people find that kind of, oh, this is my thing, this is who I am sooner than others, but, it is a journey. And I think to your point earlier about the sense of, which I think is a very important driver at the moment and focus of a lot of the discussions that I'm having, it is about that thing that you mentioned, that sense of belonging, a sense of community, that connection that we need. And I think I'm really fascinated by that, because this is what we have lost. And I think this is where, unfortunately, the generation where my sons are in their 20s, they have really suffered, because they have they have felt the biggest impact. And obviously, COVID was a terrible thing that
Yeah.
made it worse. But it is this digital age that we live in. We are more disconnected and lonely than ever. And humans need that in their lives. And we cannot ignore that. And we must make sure that whatever happens in this world of, generative AI and, being ruled by robots and all the rest of it, that, that we must remain human at the core, and we must be able to feel that what we need in our lives that comes from other people and being with other people. We're tribal creatures. So that is starting to factor a lot. And even this a conference I was in, and I just got back last night, and then went straight to another speaking engagement. I'll come on to that in a second, but there's this whole music and DJing thing that I do, which
Really want to hear about the
whole other
DJ.
story, but it's
I've
totally
seen the
feeds into
posts.
this.
They look insane.
so so I think, but at that conference, which is quite traditionally, a lot of the longevity conferences that certainly in the last 3 weeks that I've been to, they're usually very, very focused on what's going to be that magic pill, that therapeutic target, that will kind of, delay aging and give us the cure to immortality, whatever, however you want to frame it. There's a lot of focus in that, and that's great. And there's going to be, many discoveries and all the rest of it. It's wildly complicated. So I think there is a huge diversity of opinion as to what extent we'll be able to achieve that. But it's all important research. But I think what people are recognizing is that, going back to my earlier points, there's a lot that we can do now at scale that will have a lot more impact on a lot more people, address the whole kind of health equity. It's all around the environments and all these things that are hitting us and really damaging our health, which obviously is linked to health span. And there is a whole talk on joy, and Joyspan, they called it. And I've heard Joyspan mentioned quite a few times recently, but it was seriously being talked about as this new investable sort of opportunity. And then I link in all the other conversations I've been having over the last 6 months: property development, commercial real estate, hotels, spas. They're all in the business of creating environments for positivity and making us
Mm.
feel good, and community and belonging. They are already doing longevity, but they haven't kind of recognized it until now. So I predict, and I think longevity, and I'm very holistic in how I see longevity, as you can probably tell. It's absolutely not just about the pills and the molecules. It's absolutely about this other space, about the environment in which we live, built environment, work culture, it's food systems, it's everything around that. And practically every industry vertical will have an interest in that. So I think, I think what needs to happen is what is guiding the investment decision making. So this is where financial incentives and the metrics of how we evaluate investment is really, really crucial. So I think some of the interesting work, even with the work that I'm doing, and this is where my Business for Health hat, which is a small social enterprise, but doing some really interesting work with the business community as a key lever as part of this long-term system change shift that we need to move up to, move into prevention, is this whole notion of health linked to economic growth. And then, of course, well-being being a really key part is we should not only measure our nation's success on GDP growth. We're seeing that that is not the solution, because you look at the most capitalistic society in the world, the USA, and they have seen that that is not the solution. It's creating more and more inequities, and actually and everyone is suffering as a result. So I think there's a whole question mark around how we actually, what are our guiding values and how do we measure that, right? So the fact that the Office for National Statistics in the UK are looking at well-being to be able to be included in that way that we measure national success in addition to GDP speaks volumes. And of course, they're doing a lot of there's a lot of interesting work in this whole notion around how do you evaluate, a nation's success. And of course, health is linked to growth. So there's a huge kind of growing awareness around that. And of course, the Middle Eastern countries, they've already figured it out. And so of course they're gonna perhaps lead the way there. And of course, other countries like even like
Bhutan?
and New
Yeah.
Zealand, happiness metrics and all that kind of stuff. And, and people like Lord Layard in the UK have been doing the happiness index. But these are really important. And it goes back, we should have happiness and joy and fulfillment and well-being. These should all be the way that we measure, how we're doing. So I think it's so there's an interesting kind of shift that is starting to take place, changing how we do things.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, I mean, I worked in banking for over 20 years, so I can't say I'm anti-capitalist at all. I think capitalism has given the developed world a lot, but I think it's also proven that it's not enough.
Exactly. We just need a new, and I'm not anti-capitalist either. I've had a few queries, and it usually comes from when I do a US broadcast. I'm not a socialist. I'm not a Marxist. I'm not a, I think capitalism has driven all sorts of, and it's also part of how we drive our own behavior. But what I'm saying is that it shouldn't just be money. That's the measure of success. Of using the capitalist kind of way of motivating people. Motivation by money is obviously not enough. It
No,
has to be
I
different
couldn't
things.
agree
Yeah.
more. And I
Yeah.
think
So
that
that's what I'm saying.
there's a tie between money, but money because it drives consumerism, which is also what's driving a lot of the social
It's
media.
not driving necessarily good things for us. That's the point.
Exactly.
And that's what
Yeah.
we're finding out. So we need different ways of driving, that whole behavioral pattern, basically. It's around the values, isn't it? It's around what we consider important. And I would say, yes, of course, money's important because we need enough money in our lives to be able to live, breathe, and whatever, do what we want to do. But clearly, it is absolutely not enough for humans. We need love, community, these are really important. And so I'm just saying, we need to factor that into how we kind of, incentivize behavior.
Yeah.
So,
No,
yeah.
we are in violent agreement. I'm going to pivot massively now into DJing.
Yes.
So this I did not expect to see when I was digging into your profile, but you do DJ and you have
Yes.
like raves. Tell us more about that one.
So that's a little bit, I mean, that is a very, very good example of a bit of surprise and serendipity in one's life. And I'm a huge believer in that. And I think that's one of the reasons why we just need to be going out and the chaos and serendipity of meeting people in random moments. I mean, so many of the most profound things that have happened in my life and my journey in life has been driven by that. So I think that alone is a need. We just need to have those more moments like that. But that, I had this epiphany moment at the age of 56. It was after COVID lockdown. I went dancing with some girlfriends after a party we went to, and I just realized, I just had this sort of epiphany moment. It was like a bolt that went through my body, a bolt of lightning. And it kind of I just realized then that dancing and music was going to be really important. And I started dancing a lot. I started realizing what kind of music I really liked. And so I did. And then of course I got my husband involved, who never used to dance. He was this shy at once. And then now he's a real dancer. And then, I got very close to the sort of music that I really like, which tech house is my favorite, for example, right?
Okay.
Or and all the genres around that. And it was through actually some surgery I had to have on my feet. My feet were becoming really deformed over the years, and I was just ignoring it. But then it got to the point where And it was worse than bunions. They got really bad, and then I had dislocated second toes, and it was just a mess. And then my feet were becoming really painful, and especially after dancing. And then of course your knees get affected, and and then I knew that I wouldn't be able to climb mountains if I didn't get this thing fixed. So I bit the bullet, found a surgeon, which took a while because I was really worried that they would screw up the operation, then I would be immobile, which of course. And then of course I had to wrestle with how do I cope with like 4 to 6 months not being able to do the stuff that I love, and I'm very physically active. I mean, exercise and I'm just a very physically active sort of
Yeah, no, I've
person.
seen you in person. I can attest to that.
I can cope with the surgery now. I've got a good surgeon, but how am I going to recoup, this recuperation? So in the end, then I said, like, you know what? I'm just going to learn how to mix music because I'll get really close to the music I love, and I'll learn how to mix it. And then one of my girlfriend dancers, who's less than half my age, we met on the dance floor. I'm very interested in how people find each other through this sort of positive energy, and this is where the science of human connection is a whole thing that I'm looking at to show the science behind why raving is good for your health. Because I'm convinced dancing, by the way, has been a huge reason why, quote unquote, I have become biologically younger over the past few years. Since I started taking the measurements. Now, just one word of you have to. So there's this whole thing around biological age, and of course there's a lot of consumer tests out there that say they can measure your biological age and all these aging clocks and all these kits. And what I would say is that it's a bit of a wild west out there. So if you do anything, my word of advice is you need a number of data points, and you need to have a number of data points over time, because that's the only way that you can meaningfully gauge whether your behaviors are actually really doing anything. So that's what I would say. But I had all those data points just because of the fact of what I do, and I obviously am a bit of a guinea pig for all sorts of apps and tests and all the rest of it. So going back, so I learned how to mix music. My dancing partner, she said, "Oh, maybe we should learn how to DJ together," because she was interested in, and so we thought we would run our first gig just as a bit of fun. And I was just more or less just vaguely competent at mixing music by that point. And, so we ran this thing, and I always thought it'd be quite fun to do a longevity rave. And we did. And we ran it, and we invited all of our friends, and we had over 200 people come. And we're like, and then it started off, and it just became, everyone just started, because longevity, what is it? And it was just really fascinating by something that I would never have expected to become quite a big part of my life now, longevity rave. And I started getting all these requests. Can you do, you're going to be speaking at this conference, can you do the longevity rave afterwards? And then I started then getting requests by like real clubs, sort of mainstream clubs, because they all are trying to bring people back into
Of course.
i.e. to the point of bringing people back in for these random moments to meet people, especially the younger crowd who don't know how to meet people anymore because they all use dating apps, which of course is ridiculous. Like, how can you rely on an algorithm to find your mate when you don't even know yourself in your 20s? I mean, I'm only just starting to really understand myself. So it's been a fascinating experience. And now I'm finding that, yeah, we're doing longevity raves all the time. In fact, it was actually a speaker and DJ'd at this event that I was last night. So I think it's catching a zeitgeist moment. I think people are really realizing, and of course, I bring that message that it has to be this intergenerational, like all flavors, all ages, all flavors. It is about just connecting with just the humanness in us, right? Which is a very powerful thing, no matter what your age, where your background is. Music and dance, it's like a universal language, right? And so all the silos come down, all the barriers, and it's just a wonderful way of just reminding us of the humanness and the beauty in our souls, that actually most of us are really good people. We want the best, for our neighbors. So I think it's interesting. And what I'm trying to do now is, and it's because it's given me also a platform to talk about all this other stuff, Joyspan, however you want to call it, which you cannot ignore it. And now I'm because of all the science stuff that I do, I want to kind of prove it that, this is absolutely, we cannot lose, culture, the human connection, the synchrony that we get with people in shared spaces. These are vital components of health and well-being. And I would argue, and this is what I want to prove, to longevity, increasing your years lived in good health. And for myself, I'm convinced it's a huge part of my formula that I've kept healthy and full of energy and vitality. Not the only one. I think hormones actually are very important. That's a big piece of research, and we're now just starting to realize it's not just about the menopause, or now there's this andropause sort of syndrome.
Yeah.
It's much more than that, I would say. And then of course, just this whole big space around your emotional and mental and spiritual, well-being, because we all have a need for something bigger than ourselves in our lives. And that's kind of part of the journey in life. And these are all the things that you don't get, in animal studies. It's like this understanding has to factor into how we invest and make policies for, at a national, international level, to make a better world for us, the sort of societies we want to live in. That's not going to just be, I mean, the idea of having our lives completely guided by a chat GPT and, generative AI and metaverse and robots. I mean, it doesn't fill me with great. I think for some of us that might be really cool, but I think, we have to make sure that whatever we do and harness these technologies, we have to make sure that it allows us, our humanness, to guide us. Because, so I think, so that's the interesting thing that's come out of Longevity Rave. But I have so much fun. I mean, I love dancing, and of course I love music. And the more I delve and speak to experts, and of course it's, everything from, the science of synchrony, energy, and there's a viral campaign on Instagram now that, house music, BPM between 120 and 130, which is actually the range that I quite like playing, by the way, is good for your health. And they say delays or reverses aging. Now, I mean, there's all sorts of ridiculous claims at the moment, and that's why I think we need the science. I'm
Yeah.
just, but that's all part of this bigger fabric and tapestry of understanding what really drives, human flourishing.
No, that's awesome. But it's very primal, isn't it? Dancing, movement.
Oh, yeah,
And if you're
absolutely.
dancing in a group and stuff, it's
Yeah.
undeniable. Even for someone, I'm a little bit like your husband. I'm very reticent. If someone wants to come to one of your raves, how do they find out about it? Is literally everyone welcome?
Everyone is welcome. Yeah, absolutely. So I think, well, I've got a website now, longevityrave.world. So I have,
Amazing.
future
We
events.
will
So our
link to
next
that
rave,
in the show notes.
yeah, and our next rave is actually on the 2nd of October, so next Thursday in Madrid. So we're at it,
Wow.
and that's going to be really fun. So it's at a longevity. It's the after party of the Transvision Longevity Conference in Madrid, and Madrid's quite fun because they're declaring themselves to be the blue zone city of Europe because they've got really great statistics. So the mayor is going to be there, and I think even the president. Anyway, it's going to be a big deal, and we're going to have a really great longevity rave, and of course, in Spain, it's going to be loads of fun. But yeah, we're doing more and more of them. I did one last Saturday in East London at a very groovy gallery. It was sort of an early evening rave. Sober rave. We had all sorts of different people there, from the baby boomers through to the scientific community to, and we did it in association with the London Rave Collective, which are trying to generate a whole kind of, not well, I guess it's sort of underground in the sense that, but we want sort of up and coming DJs and sort of an alternative kind of rave culture than just the ones that are dominated by the big clubs. Because I love the idea, which is, basically, I mean, I'm living it. I'm a novice DJ and I'm just getting practice. Obviously I've created my own thing. But we want other people, and I can't tell you, I had so many messages come to me, and people who appeared at the rave. I was in the Guardian newspaper a couple of weeks ago about how I became a DJ at 60. So there's been a lot of interest in that, how I did that. But I had all these people who were writing me notes saying, "Oh gosh, I used to I used to be a DJ, and I sort of like I feel like I shouldn't do it anymore because I've reached 60." And I just said, just come. And there are so many people with those stories that came, which I think is just so wonderful. I mean, you just do what you love, and age should not stop you.
Well, particularly because realistically, 60 now is possibly only halfway.
Exactly.
Seriously, why start doing things
You've got
now?
all new chapters or many chapters ahead of you.
Whole new
So,
novels ahead.
yeah, exactly. So nothing should stop you. You just need the confidence, and you just need to feel good about yourself. And so this has been a hugely rewarding part of my work. And it's the joy. I mean, it's really about that, because obviously I just love, I mean, it's great to see other people just feeling good, and happy. And we need more of that in our world. And so, yeah.
Amazing. Okay, we normally do like a whole quick fire round. I'm just going to ask you one quick fire question, if
Yeah,
that's all right, to close out.
sure.
Because you've already covered literally every question I already had, which would be, we've talked about systemic change, and that does feel very, very big. And again, thank you so much for the work you do in that area, because I can imagine that sometimes feels very hard. As individuals listening to this, what is the one thing you would ask people to sort of focus on or prioritize to take care of their longevity or their joy span and their health span?
Just, I guess the main thing is just to work out what really matters to you as an individual, because if you focus on what makes you happy, because I think, just to re-examine your life in terms of like, and maybe thinking ahead a bit, like, in 10, 20 years, what is that you really enjoy now that you'd still like to be able to do in that time frame? And what do you have to do to be able to make sure that you have the energy and the health to be able to do that? And that might really help motivate you to focus on that. So the other thing I would say is just focus on, I mean, build from the small things, right? And do what feels good, but that feels natural to you, that you feel little habits that you think you can develop, because if you make it too crazy and too big. I mean, the idea that all of us would have to follow Brian Johnson's blueprint. I mean, it's his joy, and good luck to him. It's his joy.
Yeah.
We all have our own way of doing it. So, I respect that. I must say. But obviously, and it's generated a lot of awareness for some people, but it has had the opposite side effect, that thinking, oh my God, if I have to do that to stay healthy, no thanks. I'd rather die unhealthily. So that is not that's not a positive
Yeah.
outcome of the whole Brian Johnson thing. So I think, I think we just have to be true to ourselves and really, really focus on what matters to you and build from small things. And it's amazing how that creates a positive, vicious circle, and that's what I would say. And you don't have to be a purist about things. It's, little things can make a huge difference. Let's just remember that. And I think, all the noise that we get, you have to remember the simple things like even walking 20 minutes a day. If everyone did that, that would have a colossal impact on our health and the economy. 20 minutes a day, that's not a lot. Obviously if you're able to walk. And it's things like that, So yeah, that's what I would
Yeah.
say.
Amazing. Yeah. So many things are free, right? Walking, sunlight,
Exactly.
breathing, as long as you're in somewhere with good air, obviously. But like there's so
Getting
many things.
as much as you can, and I know for some people it's difficult, but I think even like being close to going out for a walk in the park, being with some trees, I mean, being close to nature, fresh air, fresh air. I mean, sometimes we've got very bad air in cities and stuff. But it's those simple things. Again, it goes back to what your grandmother told you.
Mm.
Being socially connected, be with your friends. And I know some people are very, very lonely and isolated. Well, and that's a tragedy. And that's why I think we have to do a lot more to kind of solve that problem together. So just be kind, to people around you. I mean, we need more kindness. So,
Tina, this has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you so, so much. I can't think of a better way to close out my week, personally.
well, thank you.
Thank
And it's
you
been a
very, very
pleasure.
much. Really appreciate it. And yeah, we'll link to, obviously, longevity raving and everything else, and all of your resources and the work that you do. So thank you very, very much.
Oh, and you can follow me on Instagram as well to get the latest updates on raves.
Perfect. Will do. I'm
Tina dot
just going to
technotics.
go and book my flight to Madrid now.
Oh, you're welcome. Bye.
Bye.
So that's it for this episode. I hope you found this session of the Health ROI Show informative and maybe even a little entertaining. Kudos to you for investing this time in your own well-being and your learning. One last thing that the legal beagles need me to say. While we deep dive into elite health optimization, and while some of my guests are, I am not a physician, and this isn't medical advice. Everything we discuss is for educational purposes only, so please work with your qualified healthcare provider on any protocol changes you wish to make. Take care, see you next time, and in the meantime, stay awesome.